First of all, let me begin. My name is Pradeep Chintagunta. I'm at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. Let me first begin by commending the organizers of this event for this wonderful initiative. Needless to say, we are grateful for the opportunity. There's a terrific slate of papers that you're going to see today. My congratulations to the editors as well as the authors of all these papers. And thanks for attending this session. Thanks especially to our practitioners who are participating in the session. So my plan today is to just give you a very brief summary of this project that, as Rajesh already pointed out, involved convincing farmers in rural China to adopt a new technology and then to also examine relatedly alternative marketing approaches in trying to convince these farmers to do so. That's sort of our objective. So there are three of us on this project. I believe my co-authors are also on the call today. Wanqing Zhang, who's currently at the Base Business School. For those of you who might know, their school was previously referred to as the Cass Business School, but was recently renamed in honor of Thomas Base, who all of us statisticians clearly can relate to and who admire. And Manohar Kalwani, who is currently at Purdue at the Graduate School of Management. So the three of us are the co-authors on this project. Okay, so what is this project all about? It's about pesticides, and as we all know, pesticides have been intensively applied for decades to protect crops and livestock, for that matter, from pest infestations. The idea being that we can increase crop yields, we can improve food production, and a variety of other advantages that come from pesticides. However, at the same time, pesticides can be a double-edged sword, and serious concerns have been raised about food safety related to pesticides. According to the United States EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, 68 pesticides have been classified as potential carcinogens. And so we've seen this, I think, in the popular press, examples of eggs from the Netherlands, Unilever's Lipton tea bags containing excessive pesticides, Monsanto's recent problems with the Roundup weed killer. All these, I think, point to the other side of pesticides. And similarly, this problem is especially severe in China, where they have found many instances where pesticides perhaps have encroached into the food system. So that's sort of the background. And so the question, I think, that faces both farmers, the government and researchers is how do we sort of overcome this problem with we currently have with pesticides. So what is the issue with the pesticides that we use today? Essentially, what we have is a fairly low efficacy in application, largely because of the harmful organic solvents which these pesticides are dissolved in which they and that are then used to actually spray them on the crops that they're supposed to protect. There's also very poor dispersion of these pesticides, and there is a lot of dust drift that comes with it. So the breakthrough that we are going to consider is this new technology, which is more of a non-toxic pesticides. Why is it non-toxic? First of all, it doesn't use an organic solvent. It uses an inorganic solvent as a transport module. Importantly, the use of nanotechnology, which is essentially breaks things down to much finer particles, increases the surface to the volume ratio. As a consequence, there's much better application of these pesticides that happens to crops. So all these advantages essentially lead to less chemical residue pollution, higher efficiency, and also importantly, it's compatible with the current way in which pesticides are distributed. Okay, so what is sort of the motivation of this particular project is to basically, as we said before, to get this new technology adopted. But as we know, with all new technologies, they don't get adopted by themselves. And so we as marketers have a responsibility towards actually making sure that the people who will use this technology get access to it. So what are sort of the challenges that we face in trying to convince farmers to adopt this technology? First of all, there is a lot of suspicion around any new product that shows up in the market from a supplier who's not known. The second thing is, even if the product is able to overcome that authenticity problem, there is this issue that I don't know whether this is sort of the best fit for my crops. Is this the right pesticide for my crops? Something in the technology literature which is referred to as circumstantial sensitivity. And finally, even if I start using the new technology, will I be able to use it correctly to get the maximum benefit out of using that technology? Right? We all know that we have the most advanced smartphones, but it's unclear whether we are getting everything that we want or can from those smartphones. So this barrier to adoption is what is referred to as technological tacitness, which the farmer could just be not using the pesticide the right way. Okay, so these are some of the uncertainties faced by the farmers. And so how do farmers overcome this uncertainty, or how does anyone adopting a new technology overcome this uncertainty? Essentially, there are several ways in which they can do this. The first is, of course, they can adopt the technology and try it out and see whether it works well. That's self-experimentation. Or there could be social interaction with peers. They talk to other people who might have adopted the technology and learn from them. And the third is essentially we as marketers provide that information that enables the adopter to actually adopt the product after learning about all its benefits. Okay, so those are the three ways. And so the specific research questions that we had in this paper was essentially to pursue one of these approaches, which is the use of a low-cost social media platform. And our question was whether we could use this platform to help alleviate the three types of uncertainty associated with this adoption of the pesticide. And in the process of doing so, we wanted to compare it with alternative methods, the baseline being that people just use self-experimentation, but we also wanted to see what happens if we bring in an influencer into the platform who might facilitate the adoption of the product. And finally, we also wanted to contrast the use of the social media platform with the firm doing its usual one-on-one marketing vis-a-vis these farmers. So those are the three scenarios we envisaged. A social media platform where the farmers essentially interact with each other, providing information to each other about the pesticide. The second is the same as the first, but with the additional influencer. And the third is the company doing its thing in the absence of the social media platform. Okay, so what was our experimental design? The observational unit in this case, because this is about adoption and social media, it's very difficult to think of the individual as the unit of observation. So our observation unit was at the village level and not the individual level. And so at the village level, we had several different types of interventions. So one was the basic information about the technology, which could come from the mobile social media platform. It could come from firm-initiated one-on-one marketing, or it could essentially come from self-experimentation. At a second level, what we had were what we call the eminent village personalities who acted as potential influencers on the social media platform. So within the social media platform condition, we had these two different conditions, one with the influencer and one without. The influencers in this case did not have any expertise with the pesticide itself. They were simply well-known and well-respected in the village for their the various kinds of advice that they provided people. Okay, and so what we ended up measuring was various factors along the purchase funnel. So we looked at the initial trial of the pesticide, the ultimate trial of the pesticide, as well as the adoption. But we could also observe all the online social interactions that took place amongst these farmers. So I'm going to skip the details of the randomized controlled field study. Essentially, we had these 4 groups of villages. As you can notice, sample sizes are very small because the randomization happens at the village level. The 4 different conditions that we have, the study was undertaken in the Hubei province, in China. Okay, and this is just putting it all together, what the experimental procedure looked like, and the various time points over which we measured the different kinds of outcomes of interest. Okay, so what were the key findings from this study? First of all, what we find is that the social media platform does a good job even in the absence of an influencer. So if we look at the adoption rates that come out of the study, the baseline, which is the self-experimentation condition, where the farmers just had access to a free sample of the pesticide and had to experiment by themselves, that condition did not have a very high adoption rate, as you would expect, only about 29%. But the two social media platform adoption rates tended to be much higher, 46% without the influencer and 59% with the influencer. So that immediately tells us that with having an influencer actually does help push up the adoption rates. The question is, what does the influencer actually do? As I said before, these are not experts in the technology itself, but they are well respected. So really what the influencer does in this case is by overcoming that first step in the three sets of uncertainties I've mentioned, which is basically getting rid of the uncertainty about the credibility of the product, right? The fact that this could be a fly-by-night operator, that's something that the influencer is able to eliminate. So the holdup that happens at the top of the funnel is actually being mitigated by the influencer. Once the person tries the product, then it's entirely up to them. There they can also get the information just from the social media platform. Now the influencer is less influential, if you would. Okay, and so the final piece of the puzzle is the traditional marketing method that firms use, which is this one-on-one marketing to these farmers. And in this case, what we find is actually the one-on-one marketing does as well as the social media platform with the influencer, but the return on investment is much lower because of the higher costs. Okay. So what are the implications? Clearly, if you want to do good at scale, which is if you want to get the larger population of farmers to adopt, then the social media platform seems like a very effective and low-cost way of doing so. The other thing is that we need to worry about all the steps in the purchase funnel to see where the holdup is happening and try to think of ways in which that we can overcome the holdup. In our particular case, the way the holdup is overcome by the influencer is largely by vouching for the authenticity of the product, more than just providing information specifically about the product itself. And so that leads us to the conclusion, at least in this case, that influencers need not have expertise with the product itself. And finally, we want to also emphasize that the social media itself cannot be a panacea, because as we said, it does, just having a social media platform where people can talk to each other doesn't help the product overcome the initial hesitation in even trying the product. And so having the influencer helps to eliminate that source of uncertainty. So that's, I think, what we concluded in the study. Self-experimentation, which is something which a lot of companies try to leverage, is really not very beneficial to the extent that it does not result in very high adoption rates. We have some unanswered questions, specifically, these are situations where perhaps people can share information on the social media platform easily. What happens if you're limited and you cannot share this information? Also, what is sort of the limits of having an influencer who really is not an expert in the product under consideration? So thanks again for listening, and look forward to the discussion session later.
Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Jennifer Sun, and I'm a PhD candidate in marketing at Columbia University. And today I'm very excited to share with you our project titled Buy Less, Buy Luxury, Understanding and Overcoming Product Durability Neglect for Sustainable Consumption. And this is in joint collaboration with my two wonderful co-authors, Silvia Bellezza from Columbia and Neeru Paharia from Georgetown. So the motivation for this research began with a simple question: what do luxury products and sustainable goods have in common? And we propose that luxury goods possess a unique sustainable trait, as they can have a longer lifespan than lower-end products. On the other hand, past research shows that fast fashion retailers are the top polluters, as their products have shorter product life cycle and tend to be discarded more frequently. Yet, despite a very long-lasting nature of high-end goods, sustainable luxury can be a paradoxical concept for consumers, especially because they neglect the durability inherent in luxury products. So in fact, many consumers prefer to consume unsustainably, allocating the same budget on multiple lower-end mass market products instead of fewer higher-end products because of this product durability neglect. So the key question we had was, what can marketers do to help consumers overcome product durability neglect and promote the consumption of fewer higher-end products that are more sustainable and will last longer? And we thought this research could be of interest to brand managers, especially of luxury and premium high-end brands, as well as marketers and managers interested in promoting sustainability and durability, so both the timeless style and the physical sturdiness of their products. And finally, we thought it would be relevant to those interested in determining the best policy for educating consumers about sustainable consumption and encourage the adoption of such a lifestyle. So in fact, there are growing trends of high-end and luxury brands promoting their products' durability, starting with the Iconic Generations campaign by Patek Philippe, in which they suggest that their products will not only be physically durable, but also stylistically relevant for so long that it's meant for generations, as well as more recent developments by Patagonia and other premium brands. So some firms have been promoting this philosophy of buying less, but buying better. So of the 6 studies that we have in the paper, I'll go over the findings of 3, the results of which, number 1, demonstrates the longer life cycle of high-end products, and number 2, inform how to best align sustainability traits with high-end and luxury positioning to encourage consumers towards more sustainable consumption. So in our first study, which was a web scraping study, we analyzed a data set of over 4,600 secondhand and new products that we scraped from top 20 online retailers and secondhand markets. And what we found was that there was a higher prevalence of high-end products listed for sale on secondhand markets compared to new retailers. So what we mean by that is the products listed on secondhand markets were not only more significantly more expensive, but there was a higher prevalence of products with higher brand status on such markets. So these findings provide evidence in favor of the premise that high-end goods can be more sustainable than ordinary goods because they have high resale potential. Yet in subsequent studies, we continue to observe that holding the total budget constant, buying one high-end good was consistently judged to be more wasteful than buying multiple mass market lower-end goods. So therefore, in study 4, we tested how to nudge consumers towards such a sustainable consumption practice and show that emphasizing product durability can really nudge consumers towards buying fewer but better goods. So if you look at the images on the right, in a between subject design study, what we found was that consumers were more likely to choose one high-end sweater versus multiple lower-end ones, and think of more durability-related thoughts during their decision-making process when durability of the product was more made salient in an advertisement, as in the top image, versus non-salient, as in the bottom image. So if you look at the results, here, you'll see that number 1, there is a significantly higher proportion of consumers who chose high-end option when durability was more salient. And importantly, in a mediation analysis, we found that such a result was mediated by the extent to which people engaged in durability-related thoughts during their decision-making process. So if you look at table on the bottom right, you'll see that there's a higher proportion of durability-related thoughts when in the condition when durability was made salient. And some of these examples of these thoughts included the fact that these clothing might last longer, or they might wear it for longer, or be able to resell them. So in the previous study, we demonstrated that consumers tend to neglect product durability unless it is made salient. And there are still important questions that remain, some of which include, do consumers actually value durability? And if so, how much do they value it relative to other important product attributes like price or style? And to answer these questions, we evaluated 162 consumers' revealed preferences regarding durability via conjoint analysis. And what we show is that when explicitly to ask to make trade-offs about different product attributes, durability emerged as an important and valued attribute, second only to style and just as important as price. And if you look at the durability to dollar conversion chart on the right, what we found was that an increase from 5 to 10 years of textile durability equated to an increase of about $296 in the value of the product. And similarly, an increase from 10 to 15 years of textile durability equated to an increase of about $77 in the value of the product. So the key findings for this research was that purchasing high-end and luxury products can be a unique means to engage in sustainable consumption, as they're more likely to have a longer lifespan. And despite such the sustainable nature of high-end products, consumers prefer multiple lower-end products because of product durability neglect. And therefore, emphasizing product durability can nudge consumers towards the consumption of fewer, better products. So some of the managerial implications of this research include promotions that emphasize product durability, as well as campaigns that can educate consumers about the benefits of durable products, by which we include both like physically sturdy as well as being stylistically timeless, leads to better world outcomes, such as purchases of more durable products that are intended to last longer, thereby reducing waste production, as well as extended lifespan of the products with higher resale and recycle potential on secondhand markets. So now I'd like to end my presentation with some of the emerging research questions that we had based off of our paper. The first group of questions include on consumer education. So for instance, how can brands and policymakers best educate consumers about evaluating sustainability of their products? And how can consumers make a connection between selectively buying fewer but better products with sustainable consumption in mind? So when we enter the term product durability into the search engine also ask, which is like a website that uses data from a section of a Google search results and generates a tree diagram of related queries. So you can see an example of it on the bottom left of this slide. What we found was there are a lot of related queries, such as why is durability important in a product, and how do you check for durability, suggesting that there is a demand to learn more about evaluating product durability from the consumer's end. So we think that marketers can take advantage of this opportunity to educate consumers through tutorials or advertisement, or by making durability claims more concrete, as we did in some of our studies. So in fact, some of the premium and luxury brands have dedicated pages on their website that seem to get at this notion. So for instance, Loro Piana underscores their exceptional quality of the Pecoronera wool that they use in their products, while Patagonia also has a web page specifically dedicated to showing how consumers can buy better by buying less. And we think product durability can also be a vital element in the emerging sharing economy, especially for luxury products. So companies like Rent the Runway and Dress You Can have massively changed how consumers interact with high-end clothing and accessories. So some of the questions in this area would include, how can brands best coexist and create synergy with sharing economy-based firms that are changing how shoppers consume high-end products, as well as how can sharing economy help encourage more sustainable consumption and ownership of high-end and luxury products. And a slightly different but also highly relevant topic includes the management of secondhand markets and retailers that specialize in used goods. And finally, for this project, we focused our investigation mainly to the retail industry, in particular apparel and accessories, but it may be worth investigating further how product durability neglect and strategies to help consumers overcome it can generalize to other industries as well. So for instance, we know automobile industry has a very active secondhand markets. So with these questions for future research, I'd like to conclude my presentation for today. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you everyone for joining us. We recorded our presentation as a video, so I'll play that in a moment. Our project is called How Do I Carry All This Now? Understanding Consumer Resistance to Sustainability Interventions. And this is our team, myself, Claudia Gonzalez-Arcos, Alison Joubert, Daiane Scaraboto, Rodrigo Guesalaga, and Jörgen Sandberg. So I'm going to play the video and I hope you enjoy it.
By 2018, 127 countries had adopted restrictions on plastic bags.
In a statement, Coles said many customers bringing bags from home are still finding themselves short a bag or two, so Coles will continue to offer free plastic bags indefinitely and assess when customers have become accustomed to bringing their own bags.
When we started thinking about this project, Australia was beginning the ban on plastic bags, but rather than the favorable responses that were expected, people were becoming quite angry and frustrated. Shoppers complained that supermarkets were saving money while they had to pay for something that was originally free. Consumer responses ranged from mild responses, such as venting on social media, to acts of sabotage, like altering floor stocks or stealing shopping baskets. Around this time, I was visiting Chile and saw that Chile was discussing the implementation of a national ban on plastic bags, becoming the first South American country to implement this type of intervention nationally. The ban seemed like an easy way to cut on plastic pollution, but based on the Australian experience, we were interested to see how the intervention unfolded. This was particularly interesting to us because pre-ban surveys had shown that 95% of people were supportive of the ban. It seemed like the perfect timing to track the intervention in real time. So we started looking into this and found that it was quite easy to access data and track the process in Chile because of the hashtags they used. The Chilean government used the hashtag Chao Bolsas Plásticas, which translates to buy plastic bags to announce the law, and Lleva tu bolsa, which translates to bring your own bag to implement it. And people responded using these hashtags. What this meant was we could see and track the process and responses as they were happening. So we had to act quickly and ensure that we were covering everything as it was unfolding. To understand this fully, we collected social media posts, discussions, observations, and interviewed consumers and supermarket workers. We saw that similar things were happening in Chile. Some people began complaining and venting on social media, and others went as far as abusing and assaulting supermarket workers, and even stealing bags. But why were people so angry? When looking at this data, we soon started to see that the problem was bigger than just the loss of a plastic bag. People were losing something more. A big change was required, and consumers had to completely reconfigure their lives and daily practices around this lost material. So we turned to the literature, but found that current marketing research did not provide us with an explanation for the resistance we were seeing. But we did find an explanation in practice theory, a theory that explains the world through social practices. This is because existing literature adopted a more individual focus to change individual behaviors in order to create a more sustainable consumption. On the other hand, practice theory embeds these individuals within social practices more broadly and allows for the explanation of how the changes brought about by the bans require individual consumers to reconfigure their broader lifestyles. And so we decided to use what we knew about social practices from practice theory to develop a theory of consumer resistance to sustainability interventions.
I will now introduce you to the findings of our study. As the ban on plastic bags was being implemented, consumers were so used to having the bags available to them that they did not remember to bring reusable ones. So at the checkout point, when they asked for plastic bags but were told there weren't any, consumers became angry and frustrated because they had not planned for this. In face of this, consumers pushed back against the ban and they asked, how do I carry all this now? Our findings explain the source of this type of resistance, and the key to understand it is in social practices. Social practices such as shopping are sets of 3 elements: materials people use, such as shopping carts and bags; skills people have, for example, efficiently loading bags onto the trunk of their car; and meanings that people attribute to the practice, such as convenience or pleasure. When we analyzed our data set, we first mapped these elements for the shopping practice, and then looked at how eliminating one of these elements, the disposable plastic bag, interfered with the skills, meanings, and even other practices that are connected to shopping, such as packaging and garbage disposal. We found consumers resisted the ban because it was very challenging for them to know how to shop immediately afterwards. At first, consumers tried sense-making to understand how the loss of disposable plastic bags changed shopping. They also had to accommodate new materials, such as reusable bags, which are different in size, weight, and have to be brought to the store. And they had to stabilize a new version of the shopping practice with these changes in mind. Consumers not only found it difficult to be good shoppers in this changing environment, but they also engaged in battles about who should be responsible, or in other words, who should carry the weight of the intervention. They also experienced unsettling emotions, frustration, anger, shame when they forgot to bring the bags. And they started to see other practices that also require plastic as potential problems. For some consumers, it felt as if their entire lifestyle was threatened by what should be a simple ban on disposable plastic bags.
Using our insights, we can begin to understand social practices and practice change in other contexts. Here are some examples of potential research questions to explore. How can consumer resistance be reduced in other contexts? For instance, a campaign on drinking recycled water. How can policymakers support the development of new competences for practice change? For example, in households recycling. What are some key success factors for monitoring and adjusting strategies in specific sustainability interventions, such as forbidding paper bills and statements, or switching to renewable energy sources? We found responsibilization battles and settling emotionality and unlinking of other practices to be challenges for practice change. What is the relative importance of each of these challenges in different contexts? Finally, what are the mechanisms of resistance in organization-led interventions? Thinking, for instance, in mandated masks and packaging-free product strategies.
In our project, we wanted to not only understand consumer resistance theoretically, but also how to use these insights to contribute to better world outcomes more practically. What can we learn from consumer resistance to the plastic bag ban? The first thing is how to design practice-based interventions to reduce resistance. First, we need to identify how a practice may be impacted. Is the target the materials people use, the skills people have, or the meanings people attribute? In this case, it was the material, so we can design policy around new materials and substitutes. Next, we need to distribute responsibility for change to not only consumers, but also retailers, government actors, and even those responsible for ensuring appropriate infrastructure and communicating the change, giving everyone a role. We then need to determine the potential emotional reactions to the ban. There are a lot of negative and positive emotions consumers may express. Planning for these can help us reduce the negative ones, as well as leverage the positive ones. Finally, we need to identify other practices that might be impacted. These can include tightly linked practices that involve the bag, like waste and storage, or even loosely linked practices that involve different types of plastic. So we design interventions that reduce resistance at the outset, then work to minimize resistance as it emerges. First, we need to help consumers refocus their sense-making. If they show tensions or lack of focus, there are informational and educational things we can do to help them refocus. Second, we need to encourage the accommodation of the change. If consumers, for example, question the motives and responsibility of others, we can help them with other alternatives and in the process, remind them that others share the burden. Finally, we need to accelerate the stabilization if it isn't happening on its own. If there are signs of discomfort or hesitance, we can, for example, demonstrate the commitment of others to the cause, support mastery with gamification, and remind consumers with clear and consistent communications. This way, we can reduce consumer resistance before and after the implementation. It's a lot to think about. So we've made some handy decision flowcharts for both designing as well as monitoring and adjusting practice-based interventions that you can find in our paper. We've included a QR code here for easy access.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sid. I'm a second-year PhD student at the University of British Columbia, and I'm super excited to be here talking about a project that I worked on with Dr. Yann, Cornil, and Dr. JoAndrea Hoegg at the University of British Columbia, From Waste to Taste, How Ugly Labels Can Increase Purchase of Unattractive Produce. I do want to thank our practitioners who are participating in this event today. And I also want to thank Rajesh and Christine for organizing this wonderful initiative. So without further ado, these are my amazing co-authors, Dr. Yann Cornil and Dr. JoAndrea Hoegg at the University of British Columbia, who've co-authored this project with me. Okay, great. So our project's all about food waste, and the inspiration for our research was actually all about food waste. We wanted to address this major issue. And as you may know, about 40% of perfectly edible, perfectly safe, fresh but unattractive produce gets wasted worldwide. And the discarding of unattractive produce actually contributes to climate change, since they get thrown at the landfill and they trap the greenhouse gas methane, which contributes to climate change. And to put a dollar cost to that amount of waste, that's about $15.4 billion of, again, perfectly edible, perfectly safe, but unattractive produce that's wasted at the retail level annually. So given the enormous environmental and societal costs associated with the discarding of unattractive produce, some retailers launched a campaign to increase consumer acceptance of unattractive produce. And in 2014, Intermarché, a French retailer, launched a campaign where they labeled unattractive produce ugly. And this campaign was a massive success. They sold about 1.2 tons of produce per store in the first 2 days, which was really interesting for our research team because it seemed a bit counterintuitive that emphasizing the word ugly or emphasizing the aesthetic flaw of unattractive produce is associated with increased sales of unattractive produce. So the two major research questions that we had was A, why do consumers reject unattractive produce? And B, does ugly labeling work? And if so, why does it work? And so what we postulate in our paper is that consumers reject unattractive produce primarily because they use appearance as a basis to judge produce attributes. And the literature has documented an ugliness penalty effect, which is when people stereotypically ascribe more negative characteristics to unattractive objects. And this extends to unattractive produce. And what we've demonstrated in our research is that people have negative expectations regarding the tastiness of unattractive produce and to a smaller extent, healthiness. And ugly labeling emphasizes the source of the rejection. So consumers may realize that the only reason they rejected the produce in the first place was because of its appearance. And ugly labeling acts as a correction mechanism. It reassures customers that the flaw is only aesthetic and that there is no other flaw associated with the produce. And therefore, it corrects for these negative tastiness expectations, which lead to an increased choice of unattractive produce. And so we wanted to demonstrate the efficacy of ugly labeling in a real world context. And that's what we did in our field study at a farmer's market, where we sold both attractive and unattractive versions of tomatoes and potatoes. And we manipulated the label associated with the unattractive produce such that we call it ugly in the ugly label condition or not in the control label condition. So in the control label condition, the unattractive produce was not labeled in any specific way, but in the ugly label condition, we labeled the unattractive produce ugly, and we switched the labels every hour. And what we found was that when unattractive produce was labeled ugly, buyers were more likely to purchase it. And they also spend more money on unattractive produce. So this was a great demonstration of how ugly labeling can be effective in increasing the purchase of unattractive produce in a real world context. But we wanted to understand exactly why is there a positive effect of ugly label on choice of unattractive produce. And so in our online study, Participants were exposed to two pictures. All participants were exposed to two pictures, one of attractive cucumbers and one of unattractive cucumbers. And we manipulated the label associated with unattractive cucumbers between subjects, such that we call it ugly in the ugly label condition or not in the control label condition. And we also measured attribute expectations. And what we found was that people expect unattractive produce to be less tasty, and that ugly labeling corrects for these expectations, as you can see in this figure here. And this leads to a higher choice of unattractive over attractive produce. So you can see here in this figure that people have negative expectations of tastiness, and ugly labeling corrects for these expectations. And this increases the choice of unattractive over attractive produce. And so we demonstrated the efficacy of ugly labeling in a real world context and in an online study. But we wanted to see whether grocery store owners and managers have this intuition already, that they believe that ugly labeling is in fact effective and a good way to promote unattractive produce. So we asked 52 of them with an average of 12 years of experience. And we asked them to indicate which of 4 labeling options they would choose to promote unattractive produce. And so we gave them the option of either using the ugly label, not using a specific label, and also 2 other options, one of them being the imperfect label, which in fact is a very popular label used by other retailers to promote unattractive produce, and a with personality label as well, which was used by a retailer in the United States to promote unattractive produce. And by and large, 46% of grocery store owners and managers preferred using no specific label to promote unattractive produce. 33% of them preferred using a more understated label, which is the imperfect label, to promote unattractive produce, and only 4% chose ugly labeling. And so this is really interesting because it seems that grocery store owners and managers don't have this intuition that ugly labeling would actually be effective. But what we demonstrated in our subsequent studies, which I will talk about, is that ugly labeling is in fact the most effective way of promoting unattractive produce. And we demonstrated this both in an online study and in a Facebook ad study. And in the Facebook ad study, we designed 3 Facebook ads, and we manipulated the description that was associated with fruits and veggies, such that we call them ugly in the ugly label condition, imperfect in the imperfect label condition, and with personality in the with personality label condition. And these ads were actually exposed to real Facebook users. And what we found was that ugly labeling was most effective in generating clicks compared to the imperfect and the with personality label. And we also confirmed in an additional study that ugly labeling is most likely to correct for negative taste expectations compared to imperfect and with personality labels. And so this has major implications for marketing practice and for a better world outcome. We've demonstrated that ugly labeling does increase purchase of unattractive produce, and this can reduce food waste. Given the nature of ugly labeling, because of its easy to implement, low cost nature, this reduces the uncertainty associated with promoting and selling unattractive produce. And given its low cost, it can also be applied by a variety of actors, from farmers to online and brick and mortar retailers. And it works best. So we actually conducted a study and we found that ugly labeling works best with moderate price discounts as opposed to steep or large price discounts, which just goes to show that it reduces the necessity to excessively discount produce and makes for a more sustainable campaign overall. And there are some unanswered research questions. So one of them being, which other labels besides ugly could increase the purchase of unattractive produce? Theoretically, we argue that any label that emphasizes the aesthetic flaw should increase the purchase of unattractive produce. And conceivably, you can imagine that besides ugly, there could be another label that emphasizes the aesthetic flaw, which could be as effective. And in fact, we found in one of our studies that misshapen works as well as ugly labeling because it emphasizes the aesthetic flaw as well, and it increases purchase of unattractive produce. What other interventions besides labeling could be used? And how does ugly labeling interact with these other interventions, such as an education campaign on food waste? And in our studies, we've mainly communicated negative information in the absence of any positive information. We've just basically emphasized the aesthetic flaw, and this has led to a positive effect on choice. And so it will be interesting to examine whether communicating negative information in the absence of positive information could be beneficial in other contexts for better world outcomes. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And I look forward to our discussion in the next hour. Thank you.